Hi, Alejandro. How are you?
Hi Marcel, how are you? How are things?
Very good, very good. It's very nice to connect with you using technology. Technology is changing our lives.
For sure, for sure.
How is New York?
Really good. I really like New York.
How's the weather?
Maybe not as good as Miami, but it's good. It's been good this year.
Well, Miami is the weather down here is very nice today. It's no clouds at all. Very cool weather. I feel walking on the streets on air conditioning. It's too bad that in May things are going to change drastically in Miami. Very
Okay. Yeah, for sure. I would imagine. I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, Alejandro, thank you very much for accepting my invitation for this short interview. Uh, as I mentioned to you over the phone, the purpose of this conference call and interview is to share with my network information related to the fund industry. As I mentioned to you, at Amicorp, where I'm right now working as a director of business development. We're working on our first knowledge sharing event of the year. This is our first of a number of events that we're going to be offering to our prospects and the industry, the professional industry throughout the year. And the topic that we chose to start is we're going to be talking about private equity, the private equity industry, and which trends do we see in that
Mhm.
industry in the future.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things that I've been doing in the past few weeks preparing for this event is doing a little bit of research about the industry. And that has included research that I've done in the internet, and also I've been interacting with players in the industry by participating in certain events that have been planned by players of the industry in this very vibrant city of Miami, which is
Mhm.
day by day becoming very popular for fund managers. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
One of the events that I recently attended to was the event organized by Battlefin. I had the opportunity to meet one of the promoters of this event that I understand has been in the market for a number of years with a lot of success. I had the opportunity to speak with Todd Schwessindeman, and I was surprised of the impact that data analytics is having in that specific industry.
Mhm.
Not only the private equity industry, but also in the fund industry at large. It's having impact on mutual funds, real estate investment funds,
Mhm.
hedge funds, and even private equity. Because private equity managers, I understand they're using the data to really do a great job choosing the right companies to acquire or maybe invest and help them grow.
Mhm.
So, considering that you're currently working as a director in a company that is called Parrot Analytics, that it's producing this type of information for funds and other clients in the media industry, I decided that it could be very interesting for our my contacts um, to really understand or better understand what is going on with the data analytics industry and how that information is being used by funds at large, and how the managers of these funds are using these informations to make better investments decisions, better designing better exit strategies, and even how data analytics is changing the way how they're actually hiring new employees to become part of their team. So, it would be very nice for our followers to understand who you are, which is your background. How
Mhm.
did you ended up working with Parrot Analytics? How that
Mhm.
business started, how it has pivoted in time, and who is your ideal client right now, and how are your clients using the information that you are delivering to them, and how that data is making a very important impact in the strategic decisions that they're making when running their specific businesses.
Right. So let me start with the beginning. So my name is Alejandro Rojas. And I'm the director of applied analytics here at Parrot. What we do at Parrot is actually we have created like the biggest, like the largest data set of audience behavior when they're watching any type of content. So think of this as like measuring like the popularity of TV shows. But we're doing this like on a global scale, and we're doing this on a massive scale, and that's why we call it big data. Um, Initially, the company started because like we realized that there were like you know people were like leaving a digital trace behind where they were actually interacting with this type of content. It could be that maybe you like a song or maybe you like a video. All of that leaves a digital trace. If you're able to put this together, then you have a good sense of what people like. We decided to initially focus on the TV industry. And like when I joined the company, it just happens that essentially, I've always been interested in understanding how data can really impact your decisions. In the past, so that you have an idea of my academic background, I actually have a master's at MIT and also have a master's in data science at UC Berkeley. So with that, one of the things that I was working on, I actually came to New York because I was part of a program called the Data Incubator. There, I was actually built a machine learning application that was trying to predict like the outcomes of two correlated assets. So think of this as like, imagine like a country like Chile that really depends on the price of copper. So like the value of the currency depends on that. The way we use the data for this would be like basically you look at all the historical prices and then you try to figure out if there's a pattern where like the two go together, and whenever there's a disconnect you try to find opportunities to buy one asset and sell the other one. So essentially that's what I was doing. In the meantime, I got to know the people who were building Parrot, and in the past it just happens to be that I had experience with the content industry because I produced TV shows in the past. So in a way, it was kind of like a combination of a lot of like things that I've done, throughout my professional career, and it was like a very interesting challenge because like I think one of the things that you have to, really keep in mind is like there's a lot of data out there. I mean, there's tons, so you have an idea of like the amount of data we collect. Like every day we have over 1 billion data points. Wow. That we're collecting. So then like really you have to make sense of that, and of course, like, I mean, like the company was built with a mission of unlocking the magic of content. So we've been focusing on the media industry. We know like the biggest clients that you would think of, like biggest like brands in media are our clients. And we work with them in a lot of different issues regarding like what type of content to produce, what type of content to distribute and all this stuff. But as we keep growing, one of the things that happen is like we start covering more and more ground. So in a way, we were able to actually have a view into the overall market. So think of this as like, you think like the catalog of Netflix is huge, but actually like for us, that's just only a piece of all the content that is out there, So by looking at all these catalogs, and we actually track over hundreds of countries and like, thousands of titles. But when looking at all these catalogs, especially, video on demand, SVOD platforms, you look at the catalogs and you understand like how popular those titles are, then our hypothesis was that, if you're able to know that, then you're going to be able to get a sense of how people are really subscribing to this platform, right? So we started with that hypothesis. And of course, like we had the data to kind of like do this analysis. So essentially like the way to think about this is like a catalog of Netflix in the US, say like it has like over 1,000 titles. We looked at the demand that each of those titles is generating over time. But then we also look at all the other catalogs. We look at Hulu, we look at Amazon, we look at all of that. So at the end, like you have a notion of like the market per se. And by looking at that, then you start collecting signals that are very powerful signals because it gives you an idea of what is the share of attention that these like platforms are getting, because at the end, again, like going back to conceptually, our hypothesis was like, if you're able to get somebody's attention, then you're more likely to monetize that attention, right? So if you're like a passionate fan of like Game of Thrones, you're more likely to actually pay for a subscription of HBO, So think of that, right? So we wanted to see if that actually holds, and like we have the data to kind of like do this analysis. And what we have found is like interesting enough, if you plot a curve, you know, like looking at the subscribers that Netflix has in the US over time, and you look at the data we collect over time, you know, like the demand of the titles that they have, it's almost like a straight line, you know. And we see that in the US, but also we see that in all the global markets, because like, I mean, everything that we collect is global. So it's a very interesting thing that we started to kind of dig more into this. And then we understand that there were like some interesting correlations, you know, that we can actually prove. And then by doing that, initially we're like our main focus, as I said, like were media networks. But when we found like that there were all these interesting correlations, then we like the next hypothesis was like, oh wow, this is very interesting for like you know, like some investors that may have like a position in Netflix, for example, because like this is a way to know how Netflix is doing before Netflix you know, issues their like earnings release. You know, we have the data daily, so we can tell you like on a day-to-day basis if like their content is being successful as getting more subscribers, or how are they doing in terms of like retaining the subscribers that they have.
So
And
basically,
I mean,
the
it's
data
really fascinating.
so basically, the data is giving you access to really know what the reports will say in advance.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And at the end, I mean, all of these funds are looking for an edge, right? So they're looking at a way to, you know, really make money and like really have like, you know, information that nobody has. All of the information that we collect is, I mean, like we have our own, you know, like what we call like first party data and then third party data. All of that is connected. But at the end of the day, this is information that is public, but really like the way we put this together and then the way we analyze the whole market, that's what really like makes a difference. And the fact that we have found like these relationships, you know, these correlations between very specific types of content, then it allows to like, in a way, deconstruct like their business model, you know. And when I'm talking about deconstructing, it's like, I'm talking about two things. I'm talking about like trying to understand, you know, if you think about, you know, like then the business model of a Netflix, on one hand, you have like subscribers coming in, right, new subscribers. And then on the other hand, you have like the ability to retain the subscribers that you have, right? So those are like the two main levers of value that you have. And what we have found is like depending on the type of content and depending how well you're doing in a specific type of content, then that has direct impact on those variables, you know? So for example, things that doesn't surprise anybody, but like, you know, like when you look at originals, so think about like all the original content, you know, like shows that are only like Netflix originals or Amazon originals or all of that. If you look at that market and you see the share that Netflix has over time for the originals, that's a really good predictor of like how well they're going to do in terms of acquiring new customers. And the industry, I mean, like industry knows that, I mean, of course, they're doing these originals because they want people to subscribe. So you have to have, you know, like new content, original content that makes people, oh, I'm going to subscribe because now you have Stranger Things or now you have whatever, The Witcher, whatever it is. So that doesn't surprise anybody. But I think what's interesting is that the data kind of validates that, you know, and then now you know what is the impact exactly what that's having. And then you can also see like, you know, depending on how successful you are with these originals, then you know how is that going to impact the amount of new subscribers that you're going to have, you know? Because a lot of times, I mean, especially now that all of these platforms like have a lot of data on their own, but like they don't share that data and they don't know the data the competitor has. The way we have structured our data set, it allows us to actually see across that, because like we have different sources that essentially looks at the consumer behavior, anything from like a tweet to a search to even like a torrent, you know, these like piracy platforms. All of that basically becomes like a very strong signal of how popular a TV show is. And then by collecting this on a massive scale, then you know like what is the share that specific you know, platform may have, and then that allows you to actually predict, you know, how well they're going to do. So I mean, it's interesting. This is just an example, but I think what has happened in over the last, I say, probably like 15, 20 years, is that the industry has, like, especially when we're talking about the fund industry, they have tried to figure out how to use any type of data that they can get, right? So I think initially, I know that they started with like credit card data, right? So the credit card data, they were using that to kind of predict like what we're going to be, if the, specific brands were going to meet their sales targets, because depending on the credit card that they collected, then they can kind of get a somehow like a correlation to that. But now, since like, like again, like the internet has made so available, so much data out there, there's even like particular uses as the one that I described for Parrot Analytics, which is very particular to a very specific industry and like very particular in the way that we collect data. But again, like by leveraging this, then you get to know how, like what the consumers are thinking and how the consumers are making decisions. And you get this like, instantly, right? So there's no delay. You don't have to wait for somebody to kind of issue a press release. You basically can include this into the model. And what that has happened, so this is just an example, and then to answer the question about how like the industry has changed, it's like, if you think about it from the perspective of the funds, then now you have people that need to kind of like take these data sets and really do this analysis and really make sense of this, So it requires like a different type of skills, because at the end of the day, it's almost like, yeah, you need to be very conversant in terms of like interpreting this data. Also being able to manage like the data sets that may be huge, as I was saying, like our data set itself, we collect over 1 billion data points every day. So it's a massive scale. So trying to make sense of that, I think is very important. How do you identify what are the right signals? So that at the end of the day, by identifying the right signals, you're able to provide the right recommendations or make the right decisions, So it takes like a different type of skill set. Yeah.
Do you guys use artificial intelligence in order to interpret that?
Yeah. So part of that is like, like every time like we have all these like massive data sets, what happens is like you have to use some type of machine learning algorithm to kind of make sense of that, So yeah, it could be as sophisticated as you want. The more sophisticated it gets, probably like you get like better accuracy in terms of predicting stuff, because at the end it's like, yeah, you're collecting this data, you're always trying to predict something, right? So it may be that you're trying to predict like what is the amount of subscribers that Netflix is going to have by the end of the quarter, or it may be that you're trying to predict their revenue. It may be you're always there's some prediction involved, right? And like what I have found is like, yes, you can start with like a simple, like, it could be like a regression, logistic regression, or linear regression. And then like with that would give you one answer. But as you do like what they call like the ensemble methods, where like you start using other algorithms, especially machine learning algorithms like, like random forests or like decision trees, or there's so many really. So like at the end, it's like, by like start playing with that and try to see really what works. And you're gonna be able to have also that edge, right? Of like, how do you make this work? So it's very interesting. It's a fascinating, I think, area to be in, because at the end, it's like, I think the value comes from like, you really need two things. You need the access to the data, but that's one piece of it. The next piece is like, how do you make sense of that? How do you use that data to really gain an advantage? And that's actually very unique, I think. Well, both are to be unique, because in our case, our data set is exclusive. So like nobody really has access to that. So you have that power. But then you also need to be able to have the skill set to analyze that and really create the model that basically has like better accuracy than anybody else. So very challenging intellectually, and I think this is where the industry is going. And I think at the end, it's like, this is the type of initiatives that I think is actually spinning over to private equity. Because what I've noticed is like, and I think just going back to my experience doing this, because I've been attending some of these events that you were mentioning. I've been at the Battlefield event, but I've also attended some other events organized by Eagle Alpha and New Data, which are like the main events that basically connect people like me, that have alternative data sets, what they call alternative data, with like funds, And what I've noticed is like, actually, like, because like I've been attending this over the last couple of years, let's say, but more recently, I see that actually like private equity funds are now attending these events. because they also see this as a way to actually have a better sense of, if they're trying to acquire a specific business, if you have the right data set, it's going to be able to give you an edge in terms of understanding better how the business is going. Like, I think the financial statement is going to give you information up to a certain point, but if you're able to complement that with really like the activity of what's happening, if you're able to have like the right data set and really to be able to actually analyze that data set in a way that allows you to understand better what the business that you're trying to acquire is doing, and how, like, what are the trends that you see there, that's obviously an advantage, right? So I think I see, like, as I said, like, I see private equity moving into that direction based on my experience of attending this event. So I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's like everybody's kind of like trying to figure out how to use AI, how to use machine learning. I mean, it sounds like, I mean, it's a little bit of a cliche, or like, like a buzzy word, but at the end of the day, I think it's like the change is for real. I mean, like, you have the data. If you're able to analyze this, I think there's going to be, you have an advantage. Of course, it's not like it's not as simple as just like turning a switch. It's not like, oh, now I have the data set and that's it, I'm done, I'm going to have an advantage. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of iteration going on, because you have to understand what the data set says, and then figure out if it's really making the right predictions, and then making adjustments, trying to figure out how to do this. And that's why it's a little bit of a skill of an art and science. It's not, you cannot really follow a recipe, but that's where the magic happens, I guess.
One of the things that for me was a surprise is the size of these events from an attendee.
Right.
Okay. In the short conversation that I had with Todd Schwendingman, he explained to me that these events, evolved by accident. He organized an event a number of years in New York, and the show up rate was very interesting. Next year, when he invited his friends and the colleagues with who he does business, the attendee number grew, and that number has increased exponentially, to the point that I understand that in New York, the last Battlefield event gathered more than 1,000 invitees. Right. And the one that I attended 2 weeks ago here in Miami, there were like 300 attendees. Right. And it's not simple to fill a room with 300 attendees. And even more difficult, finding a room filled with very sophisticated people, because everyone in there are engaged with the fund industry and in the data mining and analytics business. And both businesses require intelligent people, because important decisions are made on a daily basis, and interpreting this information and using technology to do so is so important. So how do you see these events evolving in the future, and what do you think will happen with those funds that will not get up on the bus of technology and data analytics and machine learning and everything that I've seen, that is happening around me? And a lot of it you very clearly explained it in the few minutes that we have been interacting in this very informal but valuable conversation.
Yeah, like, actually, let me give you an idea of how these events work, because I've been, like, as I said, like, I've been to a bunch of them. So now I want to just give you a sense of how this works. Like, for example, that Battlefield event that you were mentioning, I was there over 2 days. I had like meetings like back to back, and these were meetings that would last 15 minutes. So imagine you have 15 minutes to talk to a fund. You tell them what to do, like what you do and how this is relevant for their investment, and this is like, so over like a period of two days, as I said, like, I had like more, I don't know, close to like more than 20 meetings, let's say. So it's pretty intense in that regard. And they also had like some conferences going on, so like you also get to see like specific use cases. Now, always useful to understand like how people are really applying, data science, and how really applying machine learning to a specific issues, right? What I have seen in terms of trends, as I said, like, yeah, it's like, it's growing, it's like, I think there's a lot more interest from like funds to kind of get a sense of how they can use this. Some of them are a little bit ahead of some of the other ones, especially when we're talking about quant funds. Usually, like these are funds that kind of, in a way, they were built thinking in this perspective. But what I'm seeing is like even more like what they call like quant fundamental, or like more like fundamental funds actually are joining the party, because they see this as a way to gain like an extra advantage, you know. And as I said, like, you know, for example, in the case of trying to predict if Netflix is going to beat their earnings or not, you know, this may be a very fundamental, you know, fund issue that they want to address. But at the end of the day, like, you know, by providing this data, they have that signal of like what's going to work or not.
Interesting.
So it's getting more like, you know, basically at the end of the day, I think
it's getting traction, more traction every day.
more traction. Like, so I see like, you know, funds like across the spectrum, you know, the fundamental and quants in that spectrum. I see like funds like all over that spectrum. And then on the data vendor side, if you want to talk about like the alternative data vendors, it's very like, yeah, it's also very wide spectrum. So you have a lot of people that have, I don't know, like satellite data, for example. You have a lot of social media data. You have like still like a lot of credit card data. And again, so many things that you can do with it. And again, like, and then you have cases like us, are very specialized in specific industries. So it's interesting. I mean, I think lots of opportunities. I think this is gonna keep going. I don't see this stopping at any time, because at the end, it's all about like how do you extract the signal from the noise, right? I think that's really the question, right? You have like now, like the fact that you have so much data out there, but then like you have to extract that signal from that noise that you're collecting, and then how do you leverage that signal to gain an advantage? That's obviously really like everybody. That's the business of funds, right? Trying to figure out like before anybody else what's happening, you know.
That edge is so important that I'm going to share with you and the people that follow me in LinkedIn. That I had a number of conversations that day, and I was able to realize a trend that is going on in the industry with the larger funds, which is basically the largest funds have been interacting with companies like yours for a number of years now. And they've been able to determine which are the best companies that are doing data analytics. And one of the things that I've seen that I was able to pick up is that they actually they start the relationship by retaining the services and buying the information from these companies. But if they become, you know, leaders in the industry in their specific niche, okay, what the funds are doing is that and the fund managers are actually acquiring these companies in order to have proprietary access to the information and prevent the competition to having access to this type of information. Right. And that relates to the edge that you were mentioning. You know, right. I don't know if you are aware of certain transactions where these have
I've heard about it. Yeah, I've heard about it. Like, I mean, I guess like a lot of times we've been asked that question in terms of like, you know, especially when we're dealing with a specific, you know, clients. There's a question of like, do you want to be like kind of like exclusive or non-exclusive, right? So of course, if it's exclusive, then the relationship is going to be more, it's gonna be more costly, right? So it's a strategic decision. I think it's like depending on each fund, like they may go in different direction, and yeah, I mean, I think that's something that definitely makes sense when you're trying to prevent competitors from getting like data that is very valuable for you, especially if you have like a big exposure to a specific you know, industry or a specific asset, where like this type of like data set is uniquely positioned to really tell you you know, insights about it, you know.
Interesting. So let's go now to the commercial side, and let's talk about pricing. You know, how for me is I would love to know how companies that do what you guys do sell your products and services, or how you sell that data, and how raw the data is when you deliver the data to the customer, or how tailor-made package you do for the client when the client decides to retain your services. You know, so let's talk a little bit about pricing.
Yeah, it's very like, it really depends, so it's very hard to give you like a range that is meaningful, because it depends on what type of like services they really want. On one spectrum, it could be that, look, I give you access to the API and then here's the data, go with it. But most times it's actually more like they want like a specific data pipeline. And by that, I mean like they're looking for a specific questions or they're trying to answer. And our data has to be like, I guess, like prepared in a way that is going to answer that question. So depending on what they're trying to do, like that data pipeline may look in different ways, and that may require different type of like support. And that's where it comes to figure out like what the pricing is going to be. I know, like, I mean, as an average, and I think, like the people from Battlefield and I think Eagle Alpha, sometimes they publish this, from all the vendors. And it looks like probably like most of the vendors are between like 50 and 100K. That's like, I mean, if you look at the whole, like, but that, as I said, like that really is like a combination of all these alternative data vendors that they sell like many different ways of selling this. So like a lot of times you're just selling raw data. In our case, like we're really looking more to solve a specific questions, right? So like that's why we usually just create like a specific data pipeline that will solve their needs, where we're trying to look at correlations that would make sense with a specific KPIs that they're trying to target, or trying to predict. And by doing that, then like, yeah, it actually, every client is a little bit different because like, they're approaching the problem from a different perspective. It may be that they're looking at different companies. It may be that they're looking at the whole industry. So many, I mean, it's very, yeah, it's just like a wide spectrum of possibilities.
Interesting. Now, I'm going to be asking you a question, which is a question that I call a red flag question for the industry. And we're not talking about, just the fund industry. We're also talking about, single family offices, multi-family offices, financial advisors, private bankers. What do you think will happen to all the companies that do compete in these specific lines of business if they don't realize that data analytics and artificial intelligence is key for the success of their business and strategically for their growth? What do you think will happen for those that lag in making the difficult decision, because it means to innovate, to actually adopt technology and incorporate data analytics and artificial intelligence in their way of doing business?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you become a little bit obsolete, right? Because I mean, it's like, I think it's, especially now, like that you have access to so much data, you have to be able to kind of process that and kind of like make that data part of your decision making process. If you leave that out, essentially like you're at a disadvantage, right? So I think, I mean, I would imagine that most people would still want to kind of like jump into this. And as I said, it's like, this is also a process, and sometimes you have to put that into perspective, that the fact is like, like, essentially like, it's not like this is going to give you an answer right away. It's not like you turn on a switch, as I said. Like, I mean, this is a process. There's like a learning curve of how do you incorporate this. But the more you do this, then like the better you're going to be at. And the sooner you jump into this, then like the better position you're going to be in the future, right? So I think there's no doubt that it's going to impact, even like family offices. I think it's a matter of like, how do you go about it, and how do you start like really, digesting this data. It's a lot of data, and as I said, like, it takes two things, like access to in like a unique data set that works for what you're trying to accomplish, and then also being able to interpret that. So having those two, it takes also time. It's like, I think we have to be cognizant that it's a process, iterative, and you have to kind of have like the mentality that you want to be where like the industry is going to be. So it's almost like, okay, like the puck is getting there, so you want to be there, like to get there, like you have to start. So yeah, I encourage like, any specific funds that are trying to look at investment options, like always it's going to be like a data set that's going to give you some information that will be unique. And if you're able to exploit that, or it's, I mean, it's to your advantage, right? So especially when you're like making like decisions, are all these decisions have like a lot of risk involved, right? So anything that allows you to diminish that risk basically is to your advantage, and I think that's the way to play it.
Well, very interesting, Alejandro. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge in the industry, your experience, your views, and how you, without having a crystal ball, how you see the future. Sometimes looking into the future is difficult, but I think everything that you have mentioned is going to be very useful for the people that are going to be participating in our first knowledge sharing event that we are planning here in Miami tomorrow, February 5th.
Good luck.
It's it's too bad that you're in New York and not in Miami, because otherwise you would have been one of our panel guest speakers. But don't worry, because this is our first of a number of events that we're going to be organizing throughout the year. We're going to be organizing at least 4 events. And after having this conversation with you and after thinking a little bit more about what Todd shared with me of Battlefin 2 weeks ago, which is basically what promoted this interview, I think one of the topics that we're going to be focusing in future events is specifically how data analytics is impacting the fund industry.
Sounds good.
Because it's like you said, whoever doesn't get up on the technology and innovation bus and is competing in this industry is gonna, it's gonna be blown out of the water by the competition.
Right.
So
I agree with that.
So the next time that we organize our next event, when we organize our next event, which is an event where we want people to share, to network and grow, basically share knowledge, also network and give the opportunity to our participants, our professional participants, the opportunity to meet interesting people, not for only business, but build personal relationships, and also grow by the sharing of knowledge that is going to happen in these spaces when we organize our events. When we plan our next event and we focus on this specific niche, which is data analytics, I'll make sure that you are invited. I'll make sure that you are invited in advance so you can plan coming and joining us in these very interesting events that we plan to do in Miami on a regular basis, at least 4 times a year. Yeah. So, Alejandro,
I'm happy to join the discussion. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Alejandro, for your time. I know you're very busy. I really appreciate it that you actually blocked some time to have this conversation. And as you know, I'm very curious, and one of the things that I love to do is share knowledge, and this is what we're doing today, and this is what we'll continue to do here in Miami.
No, thank you for reaching out. Always happy to kind of share my experiences, and I think this is a fascinating topic. So, I love talking about this.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. See you, my friend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.